Hello, we made it. We made it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've been having a wonderful time here at Strange Loop. This is my first time at Strange Loop, and I'm really thankful to be here. There's been amazing talks over the years, and really brilliant people doing really amazing things. So glad you're with me, and let's get this show rolling. So today, as you can see, based on the title, this is what we're talking about. We are in St. Louis. Is anybody here, from here? Yeah. Oh, a lot of you. Wow, that's awesome. Oh, man. Is anybody both a computer person and a musician that's here? Oh, wow. That is awesome. OK, so I can see where a lot of the interest comes from. That's great. That's great. OK, beautiful St. Louis. Grateful to be here. My name's Ben. I'm known as Ben Source all over the web. So if you want to find me, it's pretty easy to remember. This is me with a internationalization working group for Node.js a couple years back in Berlin. I'd say I've had two careers in my life. The first one was in music, and I toured and recorded, worked in recording studios, and that's me conducting a thing for another conference a few years back, and that was really fun as well. And I've also been involved here and there with computer music and web music. If anybody's familiar with computer music, it's one of my heroes. This is John Chowning. He discovered FM synthesis and developed that. And then I've done community events for years and have been a part of the web community. This is PDX Node, Node.js users group. And then I also work at Datadog. So I really care a lot about observability and how to understand what the heck is going on under the surface with your actual users and deployments and stuff like that. And these are sort of the things that I've been involved in over the years, and that's a little bit about me. So before we get into some fun software experiments, let's pull back just a little bit and start here. So today we are exploring how making live music together is evolving with the web. That's what we're going to be talking about primarily. Kind of where it is, where it's going, what's possible, what's confusing as hell. so we'll get into that. Yeah, so before I start really quickly, I just want to see if it's a possibility to do the demo that I was planning on doing. So I'm just going to check to see if no, still, OK. That's OK. I have pre-recorded something to share at the end, so you can kind of see where it has gone. So yeah, what I wanted to say here was that live music has been a fundamental thing for people ever since we could make sounds with our mouths and hit sticks and make noise. It brings anyone together anywhere at any time, and when it happens, we remember it because it's at the root of how we connect and relate to each other. And there's so much correlation between connection in music and connection in the messages that we send to each other. And it's a beautiful thing. Over the past 100 years, the way that people spend their time connecting has drastically changed in general. And I think two historic moments that are really worth remembering today in terms of how they've impacted how we think about making music together is audio recording and much more recently the pandemic. So audio recording technology introduced musical events as artifacts to the general public that we could buy. And that's great, but the trade-off is that we began to think about music as sounds and how they make us feel instead of how sharing musical experiences together brings us closer together. And more recently, with COVID, it showed us how we feel when we're not able to gather together and engage with our friends, family, and people around music. There was something missing. And I bring all this up because I think it's a pertinent backstory to how live music on the web is becoming a recognized need. And so I think with that, we should quickly take a look at what networked live music is, and how it came about, how it brought us together, or how it came about, and how it helps us share experiences together in the web. So briefly, what is it? Well, over the about 20 years ago, Nick, please just leave me alone now. I'm doing my talk. OK. We'll push the change back to HFS main. Oh, it might work. Hey. All right, let's see. Okay, a little over 20 years ago, some members from Stanford's CARMA, which is their Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, they described network musical performance as a real-time interaction over a computer network that enables musicians in different locations to perform as if they were in the same room together. This has been the definition that most people who care about this domain are familiar with and kind of their go-to definition. But as we'll see moving into this talk, that may not be the only way that we can make networked live music happen. So how did we get to this juncture anyway? I think you should know about a few faces for a little background as well. So the CARMA people. John Chowning on the left there, he discovered and developed FM synthesis, procured the way that we experience music on computers for decades. If anybody is old enough, as old as me, and remembers things like Sound Blaster and like stuff, you know, and FM chips and the MIDI sound, you know, that everybody talks about, that happened, that we wouldn't have had music like that at that point in our computers if it weren't for people like John Chowning. And that was an extremely important milestone to get to where we are now. So then in the middle there, we've got Chris Chafe, who is the director at CARMA. He developed a low latency audio streaming solution called JackTrip, and it works on Linux systems, low latency audio focused kernel stuff, and that it runs on these tiny machines, and people set them up, and they can play with like peer-to-peer with relative low latency between each other, but it's in regions that are very near. Because of latency issues and things. We'll get into that in a little bit. And then on the right there's JackTrip Labs, which is a newer company that is commercializing the work of JackTrip. It's most well known right now for Eric Whitaker, who has like a virtual choir. He used this about a year or 2 years ago to perform like a mass choir performance within about a 300-mile radius of all the performers. Really quickly, the web audio people, so like web audio is about 10 years old now, which is crazy to me. It's almost 10 years old. And it's a standard that, if you're not familiar with it, it's a web standard that allows developers to access primitives in the browser that open up sound synthesis. So we're not talking about like you can play an audio file with it, like a wave or whatever, but we're talking about the synthesis and the physics of sound, using that in the browser, making synthesizers using MIDI to control those synthesizers in your browser, and that sort of thing. So it doesn't take much of a leap to go, there's this, and the network. What do we do? You know? So that's pretty cool. And then, yeah, some notable people here, Chris Rogers, who first proposed it, and then Hong Chan Choi, as a friend of mine, amazing person who helped develop things like the audio script, the audio worklet, which like makes it really easy just to put audio on a different thread in your browser, because the way that browsers work, you know, usually goes on the main thread with JavaScript, so there's one flow of traffic. You put other stuff on there, you're trying to do audio real time, it's not going to work, right? So, he's helped make it easy to do complex audio calculations on other threads and whatnot. You know, those people have been really worth mentioning, because without them, this wouldn't, you know, making live music in the browser wouldn't be possible. But what about this as a need? Is it really a need? You know, like live music is pretty cool. People go to shows now again, and you know, people seem to be able to stream performances over YouTube and whatnot. You know, like if they want to. But is there really a need for this? Well, there's definitely been some significant interest in this domain, and it continues to grow. With these awesome projects that have come out in the last 3+ years, Ableton released Link, which is a local network jam session, because it's completely doable over a local network. Zoom has a high fidelity music mode, which is really cool, and a lot of people use that to try to rehearse and practice now and share ideas and whatnot. So there's definitely interest in the world of Zoom. And then there's a few startups that are trying to build cloud collaboration platforms on remote music making, like BandLab and Soundtrap and SessionWire, and Avid has one called Cloud Collaboration. And of course, professional musicians are live streaming performances over YouTube, as I mentioned, and Twitch and other platforms, while they're performing from a central location. So as we can see with all these different methods and tools for doing this now, the two desired outcomes that are present that we can see are jamming. Like people really want to be able to jam, right? They want to be in the same place playing together, and that's awesome. But they also have a desire to deliver a live performance. Like, can we just deliver it and not have to be in the same place? That would be so awesome. How do, is that a tool that we can get? And the tools that support these activities, they're going to grow, but it's still really early days for web audio. And to make increasingly useful progress in this domain, we have to keep learning about how to navigate through the cruft of the browser and the network and all the things that come into play that contribute to latency. And then we also need to remember to have fun, because all of this has been spurred on. Like, I think that most of you are here because maybe you said, like, oh yeah, there's a lot of these tech. This one will probably be fun. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, there you go, right? Because music is fun. It hits something that's core. Like, it's not tied up in and of itself in one company or commercialism or whatever. Like, I'm not trying to sell you anything. We're just trying to do something fun because we're humans. We love to do it together, right? And things are going to get better, and we can get there over time. But we need to remember to have fun. And so that's how this project started with me. So what is browser music, and what does it look like? As we've already seen, everything to date has been dependent on this jam room idea. Jacktrip that I mentioned seems to be the closest realization to like a jam room within that context with their app. But what are the constraints for something like that if you want to do a jam room today? Well, there's bidirectional latency. So you have to start thinking about things like time, like light over distance over the network. If I go, I have a figure later on another slide, but over 100 miles, it adds like a few milliseconds of latency for each hop, right? And so the more you do that, if you're trying to play this way to someone and they're trying to play back this way to you, the further apart you are, you're gonna, like, if you're like 1,000 miles apart, it's gonna sound like you're playing with a really bad drummer, or like or like your guitarist can't keep up or whatever. And so like that's not what you want in this sort of situation. But and it's hard to tell what all the variables are at times. Yeah, but we'll get there. So for Jacktrip, it's about 300 to 400 miles. So even with low latency audio and bidirectional, like fast streaming of audio events and whatnot, or audio sound, sorry. I've been doing a lot with MIDI, so I'm thinking in terms of events. Audio buffer data, sending across the wire. It breaks down after about 300 miles, 400 miles, because then that delay starts to get enough to not make it be cohesive to be able to play together. Because of physics. But also, I would say much more. Like, we're talking about physics of light, but we're also talking about the physics, we're talking about like the architecture that we're working with and all the little unknowns that are in between. There's everything from what's out there, hopping over a network, to what's right in front of you. Like, you try to do web audio, and I've been running into issues like when I navigate away from the browser, and I have an audio context playing sound, because somebody's playing, and I go to like Zoom to talk to them, it stops because the browser's like, hey, you can't play audio if you're not looking at me, What? So you have to go and programmatically say, resume here, and you're like, stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff that can get in the way. This is all about like, what, why isn't it on the web yet? Because the web is supposed to be this fantastical place of everything is amazing, but it's, it sometimes, often, can be, if you want it to be. Okay, so let's talk about the inherent constraints of browser music here. So if you're trying to recreate the jam room, standard web browsers and web APIs can't really perform this as well as a standalone, like specialized low latency application that's either run on hardware like Jacktrip or whatever. And other inherent issues that come with using like Chrome, the different platforms and Chromium and all that. So like in a browser, at best, I don't know if you saw Google's shared piano experiment, but a couple years ago, but at best, you can probably do something like this and get away with it, and it can be fun. And what this is people are able to connect from anywhere and play notes on a piano and have it relatively sound like it's in time, because it's small enough that and the data is small enough, and just it'll still break up with latency over distance and all that. But that's about like what you can do in the web to get people together. And I have something similar that we'll be doing in just a minute, because I think that one will work. What I submit to you today is that there are other ways of recreating a jam room, or not a jam room. There's other ways of recreating live music that's fundamental to delivering a musical performance, and it doesn't have to be a jam room, but it's just another tool that can be leveraged to make live music work in the browser. So before we get into that, we should probably ask ourselves, what do we actually want with live music? So live distributed musical experiences, of course, is one, right? We want to be able to gather people together and do something and have it go somewhere, and other people can enjoy it. We can enjoy it while we're doing it. And this is Eric Whitaker with his choir, virtual choir, using Jack Tripp. Or you might want to create, you might want to have musical parameters from a live performance exposed to the audience. To you, you can play along. You can play it. You can tap in and play along with the performance, and be an integrated part of the event. So with that, if this goes, we can do that. I don't know if anybody has, oh man. So I think this is going to be like laptop only probably. So if anybody has a laptop,
I got it.
Okay. So I'm gonna see if this works. I'm gonna talk to my friend Nick. You'll just have to deal with the warning messages. Okay. No problem. Okay, wait. All right, push changes. I need to redeploy. Okay, all right, okay. Well, let's see if I can do that. So I'm going to hop on the server here. I'm going to kill it, and then I'm going to actually, this is like just in time. Here we go. Pull request, nothing. He must have put it on there. Okay, so I'm going to get pull. And aborting. No. Okay, get status, get stash, get pull. Okay, let's see, shall we? Okay, CD. All right. Okay, that should be live. Let me check. And I'll go over to event mode. Ha! Really? Oh, maybe it's Ha! There we go. Okay. Hello. Okay. Okay. All right. Here we go, everyone. Okay. So I'm going to go back to that URL. Now, with this URL right here, and sorry, it's a string of numbers. Did not have time to set up DNS stuff. If you have, it's going to be HTTPS. So do that. And if you see something that's like, hey, you can't do this, like on the browser, then what you need to do is type in, I'm sorry, it's annoying. What you need to do is type in your browser, all one word, all lowercase, this is unsafe. And it'll let you through. So that's what you do. Okay. Okay, now, yeah. Ooh, there's some people here. So this is chromatic. It's probably not going to sound gorgeous or anything, but at least if you stay in the middle keys, it should be like a Dorian scale, and it'll at least sound like okay. That actually sounds really cool. Works on mobile? I didn't try mobile. That's great. And so my original thought here was that since this got pushed out, I didn't have time to like bring in. I have like a synthesizer. I was gonna set this up into the sound system and be playing, like having you play, and then be playing in a Dorian mode as well, and then have it be a musical experience. So what I'm trying to show you right now is that we're just using this over WebSockets. It's a straight up like Node WebSocket. That's it. And so the time is actually not that bad. You're here in this room, and it's like just a little bit of delay. That's enough. It's not. It's at a place where you could, like, if I expose parameters from my synthesizer to you, or or I did this where we're trying to do like a musical mosaic or something, and I set you in a certain scale, you would be able to do that. And so there you go. That is the musical mosaic. There you go. And I'm gonna figure out how to kill this before I go on, so I don't go crazy. Okay. All right. I think if I kill the server, it'll just, yeah. Killed the server. That did it. Now I got a hanging note. Okay. There we go. All right. That worked. Great. That was fun. Woo! Thank you for joining me on that little journey. That is something that similar to something I was able to do a while ago, and it's just so fun when you start to have people's presence audible with you, especially even in a browser or whatever it is, and to know that we're all here and we're all doing that, and it's going to a place where we can all hear it collectively is really cool, even if there is a little bit of latency. So that was awesome. Okay, thank you for joining me with that. Let's go on to live music. So let's find my notes. Let's talk about live music over the web and approaches to enable it. Now this part's going to get a little bit. I think I put too many code slides in here. I'm going to like kind of go through them. I don't expect everyone to be like reading them all or whatever. I'm just going to try to explain to you like what's going on and what's important. So don't let it take up your cognitive space. I'll get through it. So the first thing I think that's worth talking about is relays. A few years ago came up with this. It just like kind of occurred to me where I was like, okay, we're trying to do this jam room thing, but that doesn't work because of latency. Why don't we just not solve that problem and go one way? How can we go one way and deliver a performance? So relays came to mind. So like if you use a technology like WebSockets where you can easily send messages to each other, you don't necessarily have the overhead of a peer-to-peer network, which you can do it that way, but going one direction, if you account for the latency and of what I'm about to show you, it doesn't really matter if you're using, time-wise, it doesn't really matter if you're using peer-to-peer or WebSockets. But what's going on here is that player one is playing their performance, and player two is hearing player one. This acts like a recording session. So in this model, unfortunately, and there's ways to explore presence and how to feel connected while you're doing this, but this will be very familiar to anyone who's been in a recording studio or been like, I'm going to create a live root for my song, if it's a guitar or whatever, and I'm singing or a keyboard, I'm going to build on that. It's exactly the same concept. So like player one plays, that performance goes to player two. Player two receives that, plays along with, that goes to player three. Player three receives the sum of player one and two's performance, goes along to player four, who receives the sum of the rest behind them, and then that gets broadcast either to a client, to all the clients and rendered over web audio, or you can send it out to MIDI devices or whatever at a live venue, which is great. So with this little code sample here, I don't know if that's big enough. If it's not, don't worry about it. I'll explain what's going on, and we'll just swing through these here. So I can share my slides too afterwards if you want to take a look at the code. But this is just a relay using WebSockets. So it's really simple. It does the same thing. It's like, hey, what's the next client? I've sorted my WebSocket clients in order. I'm going to pass it to the next one. Great. Did they get it? Great. Now I'm going to send it to the next one after that. Send it to the next one as the messages come in. And the next, that's relays. The next thing I think that's important to talk about architecturally is event sampling and playback. And I wrote a blog on this. So if you want to read this in detail, it's on my site. Oh, opensource.com. So if you want to go there, check it out, please do, because it explains it in detail. So event sampling and playback is really important. What do I mean by that? I mean that in order to not realistically, in order to account for all of the inherent latency of playing, sending to the next person, getting it on time, and lining it up using JavaScript, sampling and playback seems to be the go-to method for this. Instead of, I've tried sending out just streaming messages as they come, and that can get really hairy, from browser to browser. But if you treat it like recording, but do it in short enough chunks that it's live, it becomes more live, like within the span of 15, 20, 30 seconds, depending on how many you're playing, and then it's broadcast. It's still within near time, kind of like general broadcasts where it's like 8 seconds or whatever before it gets sent out. So event sampling and playback is really key. I don't expect you to be able to see that, but what's going on here is that every 5 seconds, a chunk of events, like sampled events while somebody was playing, is sent to the next person. And so it calculates the time for if it was 5 seconds after they started playing, and then it sends it out to the next person, and that continues to go for every client. And so it's sampling using, I'll get to that in a second, sampling using request animation frame, and I'll explain why. So then there's event playback. So when a user receives the notes, what happens? Well, that data gets looped through and summed and sorted in time based on the time that it was sent. But there's another problem, right? Like you can't just send data from one client to another like immediately. You have to count for the offsets of every client. And so with that, you have to calculate the offsets of every client. And so that was kind of a revelation to me, because when I first set this up and I had things going from person to person to person, it was like all the way, just down the line. And it's just like shotgunning, like these notes. Okay, well, that's not going to work, right? That's not music. so, and that's not in time, right? So what do we do? Well, calculating the offset by each connection, like on the WebSocket relay, is what you have to do. So if you, like here, what I do is I check for a global note offset. And then it's like, when did they start hearing the note right before that, and when did they start playing? And then it kind of gets just the right time to be able to start playing the notes in time and summing them together. There's another one, using browser primitives like performance.now. You can figure out exactly, on a high resolution, where you are at what time, and use that to create your calculations. And then play back accordingly. Okay, so that was a bunch of heady stuff. You can look at the blog if you want. Great. The next thing is MIDI. So leveraging MIDI. I chose to go the route of MIDI first, rather than going the route of trying to use like waves and things like that, and trying to go with audio, because the notes themselves are like 1 to 3 bytes per message, and they're super tiny, and it's really easy to control and to experiment with. MIDI does come with constraints, though. You have to have a note on and a note off. And this has been a long-term problem for MIDI, right? So I'm sure if many musicians in here, if you've been playing along with something and you accidentally turn your keyboard off, or change to something and you're playing and then boop, it just hangs. That's been a problem for 40 years with MIDI. It's crazy, because MIDI is a 40-year-old protocol, believe it or not. You can connect, if you use MIDI conversion to CV, you can connect a synthesizer from the 60s to a modern MIDI device and just play everything fine. It's amazing that we can do this with the age of these devices and stuff. So anyways, yeah, note on, note off. Still not a solved problem, and it gets funky with JavaScript here. You have to send messages that your MIDI devices can understand by using string interpolation and whatever. By getting it in a hex, getting it into a hex number that it can understand. So yeah, the last thing I want to mention here about architecture is WebSockets. And WebSockets, even though since we're going one direction, it's not peer-to-peer, it's really easy to be able to send different event types. So you can say like, hey, did a new player join? Yes, they did. OK, everybody, here's the new player. OK, put you up on the visualization or put you on the roster or whatever. So I have a function in here called create roster, or send roster, create roster, that kind of thing, that always updates like who the players are, who's here, and positionality, right? Because we're doing it in a relay. So it's very important to establish with your players, with your band members, that what position you're in before you start playing. Because if you were expecting to hear, something, and you're in position 1, you're not going to hear it. And if you were, expecting to hear the drummer's in position 3, and you're in position 2, you're not going to hear the drummer, right? So it's like you got to play with it that way. There are limitations and struggles. JavaScript is weird. It's a weird language. I mean, like, this is the one code sample I think I can show, but like, what do I want here? This is like, say this is my MIDI message, and I have 3 bytes that I want to send to a MIDI device. And I make my uint8 array. Great. Now I'm going to stringify it so I can send it over the wire, and I want it to just play. Nope. It's an object now. Why? Why is it an object now? So because I said JSON stringify, I know, and arrays are objects in JavaScript, I'm sure people know. But why? Who knows? OK, so there's that. JavaScript's weird, so you have stuff you got to deal with. Also, JavaScript timers are really tricky. You cannot, depending on the context of what you are trying to do, you cannot rely on timing if you're trying to do things at a really small interval. I went at this problem with stupidity. I'll put it out there. I went at this problem with like, I'm just going to try putting it at a millisecond for every time that it should fire and see what happens. Nope, that's not going to work. That'll never work. And there's a reason why, and that goes back to script processing and main thread stuff, where the DOM is being calculated and rendered, and you have all these other things that are trying to get in there. And so if you try to schedule an event to happen and something else like your page is rendering or whatever is going on at the same time, nope, that's not going to happen. It's going to have to wait until this point in time, and then it can do it. So it's not going to, that's just the way it is, and it's not going to be accurate necessarily if you're going down to really small intervals of trying to set timers for events. But it can be done accurately. And the go-to method for this in the browser right now, especially for like live gaming and tools where people want to do stuff with real-time performance, the best way to hook into the browser with a dependable sample rate is by using the request animation frame API. And the reason is because it hooks into the refresh rate of the browser, which has to be as constant as possible at 16 milliseconds. So if you can hook into that, then you can get pretty dependable. Like it's pretty rock solid. I'll show you in a little bit. There are complications, though, with what I'm doing that I'm like just discovering as of like yesterday with request animation frame and timers. Again, I thought I had gotten past this. But anyways, that's one of the best ways. So like, how do you make sense of this stuff anyways? Observability, right? Like, you need to hook into observability and because like there's just no way that you're going to understand like how long it took someone like with your real users, how long it took someone in China or like in Beijing on an elevator trying to load your app, and then someone in St. Louis, trying to load your app in here with conference Wi-Fi, and then like whatever. It's like, how do you know what the latency was and if the performance is, so like the only way you can really make sense of this stuff is plugging in observability, because there's so many variables, and how the heck do you make sense of it all anyways? So, so what I would suggest to you is to tap into a tool like real user monitoring. So I don't, this is not like a Datadog plug just because I work at Datadog and they have an awesome real user monitoring product. I mean, wowie zowie, right? You can just plug it in and it's awesome. But I actually did a talk on this at Scale conference in LA. You can definitely do it open source if you want. Obviously, there's a lot more configuration if you don't want to pay for a SaaS product, but you can do it just to see what's going on with your users and tracking these latencies. But what's going to get, oh yeah, and I can show you, right? So when we were doing all of that, I had Datadog's real user monitoring plugged in here, and so it was gathering all of the activity that we were playing over that. I'm not scraping anything. Don't worry about that. I'm just this is like performance metrics for every user. So like, hey, when we all loaded the app, there's these notions of things like largest of core web vitals, like were the vital components that made it enjoyable there? Did it load fast? All that, and then how many sessions have I had? But what gets more interesting is if I dive further in, I can start to look at, okay, cool, we had a lot of different sessions just not that long ago. Great, awesome. I'm going to dive in here and see what happened, and if any errors popped up or whatever. It looks like this person mostly just loaded it, and I can see the latency of the events that happened, and like this kind of stuff. If you're trying to, I'm not just saying this because I'm a Datadog, but if you're trying to do something like this, it's so hard to get somewhere with this high of a frequency of events that happen without being able to understand. Like before, my friend Nick must have done something great, because just before this demo, there were like 500 errors that were popping down like on this thing. So like, and if you upload source maps and that kind of stuff, you can get to the point, as close to the point of code where the error occurred, and you can fix that. And you can fix your app before your users experience the problem. Is the thing that I'm trying to show you today. So I don't like trying to go blind, and I want to be able to make this experience rad, because music, you shouldn't be thinking about what you're using while you're playing music. You should just be playing music. And so I think it's really pertinent to this context. So like with that, like what else is going to get in the way? Infrastructure is gonna get in your way. Oh, there it is. 120 miles adds a millisecond of latency to the average packet, right? So infrastructure is going to be a problem depending on where you are in the world, and how you want to handle that with observability is distributed synthetic performance testing. So like, what I mean by that, big word or whatever, but what I mean by that is synthetically test your app in different regions. With WebSockets, with a WebSocket app, what I'll need to do is deploy it to servers in different regions, and then test the API calls around those regions, and see what the performance is like in Ireland and in central US and whatever, to be able to make sure that we're having as close to a good experience as possible. And that's why synthetics is like super important in that regard. Okay, so that was kind of like an overview of all the things that it kind of took to get to a point to where I can probably have people play together. Still a lot of variables I'm discovering every day, and it's fun. But and that's the point, right? So what's the current progress? Well, first I'm going to show you where I was at last night with this. And then after that, I'm going to see if we're at a place to where I can, to where I can have my friend test it out. Oh, okay. So maybe I'll just have to show you this. So this is where we were at last night with a keyboardist and a drummer. Shoot, I wish okay, sorry. You're going to have to listen to it through my keyboard, unfortunately. Maybe I can hold my mic close to it. We can hear it there. So, no! Okay, so, like, this is just testing, right? So we're not doing anything fancy or interesting right now. But what you can see here is that my friend Jove is just like hitting his drum triggers remotely, and they're going into this thing, into this octopad thing that I have here, and they are triggering these notes. You can see them lining up, and then she's just trying to like play something so that we can test this over the wire. And then Jove gets bored. yeah. Anyways, so like, as you can see, there's been progress, and people are able to play in time, which is great. And that's just natural. That's just natural time. There's no metronome. That is somebody playing in natural time, and somebody on the other side hearing it, playing along with it, and then it coming to us to hear, rendered through those MIDI sounds. I'll say those sounds that sound like what we think of when we think of MIDI. But let me just see if this is. Let me see. I'd like at least want to show you the app if I can. I'm going to see if it's if my friend Nick solved this issue and take a look at it. So let me try that. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's just see really quick, and then I won't keep it too long here. Okay, so I killed the server, so I'm going to have to go back to the server. I'm going to have to start that. And then after this, we'll wrap up. I know we started late, we're ending late, but I'll let you go here in just a moment. Okay, great. Nope, that's event mode. Haha, I didn't tell you that you could switch modes. Hey, great, my keyboard shows up. Okay, awesome. Okay, so this is kind of the app right now. Again, I wish I had it plugged in over there, but maybe you can hear it from here. Locations. So when somebody shows up, you can see where they are. I just assigned them random fruit names for now. I'm called Union Hackberry at the moment, and I am in St. Louis, and I might get some information on that. And how these people are playing those notes is that I can select, whatever instrument I want to play. So as we did before, we can play via the keyboard. However, if I want to choose a MIDI source and play from, something like this, which it should, hold on. If I want to do something like, yeah, so if I want to play, from a keyboard, so all that's possible right now in a browser, has been for a little while. It utilizes Web MIDI. Another really cool thing, there are not, like VSTs, I want really good sounds because I'm a musician, right? And VSTs are proprietary. And I forgot about that. I'm like, I'm going to get VSTs ready for this thing. Nope, sorry, I can't, because you have to pay an arm and a leg for that. However, there's a really cool project called Web Audio Modules. If you are into building that kind of stuff, please help them. There's only a few people doing it, and it's a really important thing. You can get stuff like through VSTs. I have a Yamaha DX7 in here pretty much. So like, if I go over to that, and then I choose like, I don't know, like Minimoog. What does that sound? So this sounds very much like that, 80s, like whatever. But if you're like, like that kind of thing. So like, if this were plugged into like a system or whatever, you could hear it sounds like exactly DX7. There's sysx dumps, so MIDI uses sysx to system exclusive messages to be able to get these sounds, to save sounds, import sounds, that kind of thing. And there's like an archive of like all the DX7 sysx dumps that you can just grab from, plop them in here, and load it. So that's like super cool. There's an Oberheim that I'm going to put in here, the like web audio module that's great as well. So if you choose that and then you select, I think what I can demo really quick is if I select this drum pad here, and then, let's see, and then I open up another window. Let's say I want to, okay. Let's say I want to output, so I'm in position 1, I'm Union Hackberry. Let's say I want to output to the, this Roland SPD series thing, and I'm going to send that to an external MIDI device. Well, that's going to go to the next player here, and they're going to receive it from a device that's like that. And they're going to receive it from a device that's like that, and then they're going to get it played on a device like this. So if all goes well, this should, let's see. So on that player, and it could be my settings. I won't keep you, but I had a video of this last night. Let's see, output to MIDI device, right? And then input, let's see, input from MIDI source. MIDI input is going to be that. And then, yeah, so I should be able to hear it. Or maybe I didn't. Browser stuff, right? Like sometimes you got to interact with the browser for it to work. Okay. Okay. I had it last night where just like this is position 1, position 2. If you hit the nodes, then like I wanted to show you, there's 5-second delay, and then they come back, boop, 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 right? And so that's what I was trying to demonstrate here. I'll post the video on Twitter so you can see it or whatever after this. But that's kind of what's going on is that you can, I wanted you to be able to hear that 5-second gap. And so it's like I play, and what's funny is if you have like Zoom open or whatever, it's like you don't want to be looking at Zoom while you're trying to do this because the players they're playing along, and then you're like, dun 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 dun. You start to you hear it in about 5 seconds or whatever. So, anyways, yeah. Well, thank you. That's what I have for you today. So thank you so much for joining me, and I really appreciate you staying long. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for that. And we'll see you around. Please feel free to get in contact with me anytime, and I'll post stuff to Twitter so you can see it.